We are on agenda item H. And I might explain to people that don't regularly attend these meetings that in March, the State Board of Education initiated a process where we wanted to establish our priorities for the board. And we went through a lengthy process, included members of the educational community, and came up with nine priorities. And number one priority is the issue that we're going to address next, addressing the achievement gap. So this is certainly a shared priority amongst the whole educational community, and that just to point out to you that the board takes this very seriously. So with that, I would call on our presenters to discuss addressing the achievement gap.
Thank you. I'm just going to introduce the topic briefly and then ask each of the presenters here to introduce themselves, and we'll start with two separate presentations and then wrap up with question and answer at the end if that meets with your interest. Significant interest to the board as well. What the department has been doing, what the department is doing, and in the future what the department will do to help support schools and leaders, teachers and leaders, close the achievement gaps. We've talked about a number of things, and sitting here in Brattleboro, be remiss in mentioning that the early college program here between the Career Center and the high school is one of those flexible pathway elements that we've talked about for a long time, and we look to support even greater the existing dual enrollment program in the state, and then other initiatives such as the model here in Brattleboro, which has really stepped out far beyond many of the existing models in early college programs. So it's just one example of those flexible pathways that we see as innovative and engaging students in helping close those achievement gaps. What the presenters here will focus on are a number of other things, from interventions and supports that the department has been supporting and will continue to support in the future. And then we'll hear from a school with some of their practices that they have been using with some great results, and I'm glad they were able to join us today. So I'll just ask each presenter moving down the line here just to introduce themselves, and then we'll start with the first presentation.
Debbie Price.
I'm Karen Edwards. I'm the Director of the Integrated Support for Learning Pre-K through Middle Division at the Department of Education.
Hi, I'm Jean Schultz. I'm a second grade teacher at Academy School.
Hi, I'm Andy Pachuli, Principal at Academy School.
To get to the computer.
And with that, Karen has the first presentation, and then we will proceed from there.
And I'm going to be talking about work that has been supported by Department of Education for the last 6 years, and then Andy and Jean from Academy School will be talking about work that they've been doing for the last 6 years, and sharing some results that we're starting to see in terms of closing achievement gaps. Can you hear me?
That's just for the video. That's just for the video.
Okay, what do I need to be using? I can talk
Talk louder.
I can talk louder. Okay. So we have been at the department really looking at practices that answer these three questions for the last 3 years. What instruction and support is provided to all students in general education classrooms? What interventions are readily available for those students who have been determined by a team to need additional support based on academic or behavioral data? And what supports, interventions, and services are provided to those students who with the most intensive needs? So those three questions really frame what I'm going to share with you. And these are sometimes called tiered systems of support. One example that we've supported is positive behavioral interventions and supports. And these are major characteristics of this approach. It's a framework that helps a school staff to organize how they'll deal with student behaviors. And when I say school staff, with this you're looking at bus drivers, cafeteria workers, teachers, administration, custodians. It really does involve the entire school staff. And it's important that it's a framework with these components. It's not it's not prescriptive in the sense that here are the strategies you'll use, here are the interventions you'll use, but it provides a framework for organizing those. I think an example of that is that a lot of schools in Vermont use responsive classroom. That is a good intervention or practice to address that first question I posed of what do all students yeah. So we started 6 years ago with 3 schools in Vermont. They were Mount Abraham Union High School, Bristol Elementary School, and Lincoln Community School. As of last June, we had 113 schools, pretty much all over the state. The pink ones were the ones that were just starting in June. And then last Friday, we had our exploratory forum where school teams that are thinking they might want to engage in this come to get a better idea of what it is. And we had 25 school teams there. And it was very nice to see that we had a couple of school teams from this hole down there in the southwestern part of the state who are thinking about doing this. For positive behavioral interventions and supports, there are a number of different types of data that are collected regularly throughout the school year. One of them are these office discipline referrals. And I wanted to share this because this is what seems to, with the national research, what seems to be making the difference that is being seen in Vermont and nationally in terms of effect on achievement results. So this is Alberg Community School. And in their first year, there were 18 student days that were lost to office referrals. And this is this is generated by assuming that there's an average time of 15 minutes for office referrals. Obviously there's a range there, but it's based on that average. And 6 days of administrator time. In year 4, they saw 4 days of student time and 1 day of administrator time, which means you reclaim 14 days of student time and 5 days of administrator time that can be focused on instruction rather than behavior.
I'm not sure I understand the chart.
Okay. So schools engaging in this practice collect information about the number of office discipline referrals that happen in the school. When Alberg started and they compiled their data for the year, it translated into 18 days of student time and 6 days of administrator time that were being spent with kids being sent to the office.
Lost time education.
Yes, yeah.
How many kids in Alberta? It's a small school.
It's a small school.
Fewer than 200, I think.
Last year, they lost 4 days of student time, 1 day of administrator time. So so what they have gained over that time are 14 days of student time available for instruction and 5 days of administrator time available for instructional leadership.
Thank you.
We decided to take a look over the last 6 years of what's going on with the achievement scores in the schools that have been implementing positive behavioral interventions and support with fidelity, which means they're doing it the way it's supposed to be done, and that's measured regularly to see that it's happening. So for students receiving free and reduced lunch, what we've seen over these years is for this group, it's an aggregate of 73 schools. So that subgroup is now close to the state average. There's still work to be done because there's still an achievement gap. But I think what's more compelling is to look at the year-over-year gains that have been made. And this is kneecap reading. This is kneecap reading for the special education subgroup, and again, coming close to the state average with, again, impressive year-over-year gains over those 6 years.
And those are the special ed state, that's not all, it's specific to special ed.
This is state special education. The green and the blue is this group of 73 schools. And for math, actually the free and reduced lunch subgroup crept up a little bit above the state average last year. You know, again, we see pretty impressive gains in year-over-year scores. And for the special education subgroup, again, in math, they crept up over the state average, and with, again, year-over-year gains that are encouraging. So this, you know, I look at this as a promising practice for closing the achievement gap. And this focuses just on behavior, although that time regain seems to be having a positive effect on academics. For the last 5 years, we've had a state personnel development grant. This one was $2-point-something million. And we piloted a tiered system of support in 14 schools and 4 supervisory unions, and with the commitment on their part that they would bring this to all the schools within those SUs. We focused on literacy and behavior, so we really moved into looking at an academic area as well as behavior. And again, we've seen some promising results. The 3 years of NECAP, English Language Arts data for cohort 1, had an improvement of twice the state average across the board. In one school, an improvement of 3 times the state average. So this seemed to be a promising practice to keep working on. We applied for a new round of the State Personnel Development Grant, and on October 1st, we heard that we got the grant. We were very excited, and we actually got the entire amount that we asked for, which is not what usually happens. So we have $3,039,968 over the next 5 years, and what we're going to be using that, the bulk of that for, is to provide training and support for preschool and school-age tiered system of supports. And why did we go that way? Well, we're seeing some promising results on a small scale in Vermont, but there are other states that have been doing this for a lot longer. And this is an example from Kansas. I took this from a presentation that Alexa Posney, who was at USDOE at the time that she did this last summer, but before that was Commissioner of Education in Kansas. And Kansas has been doing this for the last 11 years, and she had a lot of interesting data. I picked one example that seemed most similar to what you might find in a Vermont district. Whoops. So what they saw in Kansas in their math scores, and these are students on free and reduced lunch, students with disabilities, over these 11 years is a 38% gain for the students in free and reduced lunch in math, and a 51% gain in reading. And this was consistent across many school districts, but a lot of them were cities and they just didn't look like Vermont. And same thing in reading, you know, big gains. And this is using a tiered system of support for academics and behavior. So we have worked, you know, kind of where we're going with this. Last winter and spring, a group was pulled together to come up with a field guide for a multi-tiered system of support that would really frame our work going forward. And Debbie's handing these out to you right now. And this is a almost final draft. The last day for comments is the 20th, and we'll have a final draft within a couple of weeks of that. So if anybody wants one, Debbie, I've made, if anybody wants the final draft, I'm happy to send it to you.
Thank you.
And if you look on page,
You're an educator, you'll remember all those numbers. And what happened about 2 years ago, we found some funding so that we could send some high schools to the Best Summer Institute and look at what was happening as far as a program evaluation around their systems. What was happening at the universal level for classroom instruction, and what were those targeted and intensive supports and interventions they had in place when kids weren't making it in the general classroom. The second year, we had an opportunity to add 2 more schools to coming and participating in that. What they did is they spend 4 days at Killington, and in other rooms at Killington as well as when the PBIS training was happening, the positive behavioral supports and interventions that Karen showed at the first part of the slide. That's looking at both the academic and the behavioral. So the second year we had 5 teams to come to do the program evaluation with, and what we're really happy to be able to offer this year is we're going to be able to fund up to 20 school teams to attend 4-day training that will be facilitated by Department of Ed staff to look at their multi-tiered system of support. We'll be taking the steering committee's document around the guiding principles, and we'll be integrating that into the training that's going to occur for those schools. The piece that that we are very excited about is when for schools that are doing the Green Mountain Star and the schools specifically that are in year 1 school improvement, the 10 core principles are all related to what are those things that schools need to have in place regarding multi-tiered systems of support. So it actually fits very well with the self-assessment work that they're doing. What happens after a school comes to the BEST Institute, where we do the educational support systems, or this year the multi-tiered system of support, is that they're then connected with someone from the DOE, and we do follow-ups. And we're currently looking this year at how it is that we can do more interactive using technology so that people have an opportunity over a period of time to talk about their practices. The schools that came the last 2 years are actually being invited to return to take their data from the last 2 years of implementing the work that they did during the summer, and then making revisions, and then also sharing some of those bumps in the road they hit along the way with the new schools that'll be there. What questions do you have? Any?
Sean Marie?
Typically, do you find that it's a particular age group, or not, like is it high school, middle school, elementary, who buys into this more frequently?
When you're saying buying into, are you talking the training opportunity or
The schools that participate in this, what level of education is typically or more often using this?
More often, so far, it's been elementary and middle schools. I wanted to add that, you know, that in order to move the field guide work forward, we have the State Professional Development Grant, we have the Act 230 funds that we're using for to support the teams at the BEST Institute. There's also a group working on providing follow-up to this, and one of the pieces of that is bringing in a national expert to help us to develop a model for high schools, because that's really been underdeveloped in Vermont.
Can I ask so you mentioned the Green Mountain, the Green Mountain Stars, and I really, until it came locally to our school district, was unaware of this system that was put in place. Is it similar to the preschool STARS program? Is it, what advantages does this program?
Could we hold that for questions, just because I want to make sure that the
Sure.
Academy School gets an opportunity in time? So if you look on, I just noticed that my copy is not numbered correctly, but if you look on the real page 5, there are 2 core groups that are doing follow-up work for the field guide, one focused on high school, the other on elementary middle. And they are going to develop in a self-assessment. They're going to do research and development for a high school model and identify areas where professional development is needed and have professional development modules developed. So that will support this work as well. And I just wanted to have you take a look at what I think in mine says page 5, but it's really page 6, to just get a sense of the breadth of both geographic coverage and different stakeholders who were involved in this work. And you know, as one of the members of the steering committee, it really was one of the most productive groups I've ever worked in, and it really brought together a lot of different perspectives, and I think we all walked away from this with a very different understanding than we walked into it about what this work involves and what it takes to really move it forward. So with that, I'd like to
Did you find the
introduce.
Yeah, it's
Did you find the page?
It's really page, there are like 3 page 5s.
Yeah, there are 3 page 5s. I don't know how that happened, but this is a draft, soon to be final.
Here on the question, while they're changing gears here, is the data that you showed in increased proficiency rates correspond with the 10 principles and their implementation, or is it staggered or lagged?
I can't tie it principal to principal, but what I would say is that if a school is doing this with Fidelity, the positive behavioral interventions and support, it means a number of things. It means that they've got a strong leadership team. It means that they've identified the data that they're going to collect, they're collecting it and they're looking at it and using it regularly. It means that the whole school has bought into doing something school-wide. So I think we do see those principles reflected, and I think that may be also what really is making the difference. You know, it says something about what these schools are able to do.
Yeah. I'm just busy trying to do timelines and causal inferences and stuff like that.
Yeah, we aren't there. This is an interesting trend. It's not research at this point. There is national research that would support the same thing.
The 10 principles are hard to argue with, meaning they are pretty correct statements.
Yeah, and what we did is the field guide has 5 areas, and those are systems, assessment, instruction and intervention, professional learning, and collaboration. So each of those, for each of those sections as they were developed, we referenced back to the principles to see how in that section the principles that we referenced back to were playing out. So there is a connection throughout that to those principles. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, good morning, everybody, and we certainly appreciate the opportunity to come and speak to you this morning. My name is Andy Petrilli. I'm principal at Academy School, and with me today is Jean Schultz, who's one of our second grade teachers. And because we're right here in Brattleboro, and we're a public K through 6 school. We have about 375 students enrolled presently, and about 57 to 60% of our students qualify for free and reduced lunch each year. And today we want to share some of what's been going on in our school, which we like to refer to as the Academy story. And our story begins in 2006. And at that time, we were a high poverty, low achieving school. And by that we mean high poverty that at least 50% or half our students were living in impoverished backgrounds. They qualified for free and reduced lunch. And low achieving meaning that at least 50% of our students were not proficient on our state assessment NECAP. So high poverty, low achieving.
Just, can I interrupt you? Knowing a little bit about Brattleboro, how many elementary schools do you have now in Brattleboro?
3.
3.
Yes.
And where are you located geographically? Are you in the downtown area?
No, we're in West Brattleboro off on Western Ave.
Okay, off Western Ave.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So there are 3 elementary schools. We're the largest. We have 3 strands or 3 classrooms in every grade. There's another school, Green Street, has 2 classrooms in every grade, and then Oak Grove has 1. So we're the largest.
You're a community school across the city, town.
Yes, we're not. We don't function as a neighborhood school.
Right. That's what I was trying to do.
Yes.
I knew Oak Grove, yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
So we prefer it to be. We couldn't do anything about the poverty. We're always going to be a high poverty school, but we prefer it to be a high poverty, high achieving school. In 2006, we had the lowest reading and math scores in the district. We had our students with disabilities, our special ed students, were seldom proficient. In fact, in reading, only 6% of our students on IEPs were proficient on NECAP. In math, only 3% were proficient. Our economically disadvantaged students lagged well behind. And that, of course, is the achievement gap. And well behind, in terms of our AYP index scores, the gap between our economically advantaged students and disadvantaged students was about 55 points in reading and math. It was a significant gap at that time. We were below state average in every category, in all of our subgroups, in every single indicator. We were significantly below state average. And most importantly, we didn't work well together as a staff. People were very autonomous, sort of closed their door, taught in their own classroom, and the focus was pretty much just the 17 or 18 students in each classroom. So it was an individual focus on a teacher's classroom. So in 2012, I'm proud to say that we now have the highest math scores in the district. 73% of our students are now proficient in math based on our most recent NECAP results. Reading scores second highest in the district, 78%. Students with disabilities, students on IEPs, have shown dramatic increases, where in reading now it's 45%, so from 6% proficient to 45%, and in math, 35%, so 3% to 35%. We also managed to reduce the number of special ed students that, or students who are qualifying for special education. And the reason is we stopped making special ed students at our school. And a lot of special ed students, a significant portion of them are really failures. We call them curriculum failures, but you can see this very easily in elementary school, quite evident that if students can't read by third grade, that they most likely will become special education students. So if you catch them before they fall, then they'll never hit the special ed ranks. So we've been able to do that quite well, I think. Also in 2012, we're now above average in the state average in every category, and our staff, I'm very happy to say, works very well together, very collaborative, and have expanded their focus from their own classroom to this sense of ownership that all of the kids in the school are their responsibility. The teachers see the entire school as their responsibility. Yes.
How many new hires between 2006 and 2012? Unfair question.
No, it's a fair question. I would say at least half of the teaching staff has turned over, and some just due to retirement, and some due to other factors.
But you haven't actually added positions. You've changed people, but you haven't added.
Right, we've not really added positions, correct. So I'll show you a graph. This is our AYP index scores from 2006 to 2012. And this will sort of help to visualize the growth that we're talking about today. The blue line on top is the AMO, the annual measurable objective. That's the target that's set by the state. And every 3 years that target, I'm sure you're aware, goes up. This year I'm reading it's about 465. In 2014 it goes to 500. So the red line is our entire school. That's the all of our students. And as you can see that at this point we're right at the state at the AMO at 465. The green line is our free and reduced population, and you can see that the gap there, that's about 55 points, and the gap here is about 12 points, 11 or 12 points right there. So we've managed to close that gap. The bottom line, which is purple, is our special ed population, and you can see they were significantly below. The gap there was huge. It was more like a canyon between special ed students and the rest of the school. And that trajectory has been very steep, and you can see our special ed students have narrowed that gap substantially.
Do you have a lot of English as second language learners in your school?
We host the English language learners program for the city at our schools. We have about 20 to 22 students right now who represent about 17 different nations at our school. And you can see a similar trajectory for mathematics. where there's considerable growth there. And again, particularly in special ed, where there's been very dramatic student growth there as well.
AYP index score, I thought that you were norming the test at 300, 400, 500 for each grade, and 540 was the cutoff point, but yet this seems to have one continuous scale.
This is the AYP index score. I think what you're referring to is the cut scores for every grade. The cut score
Yes.
for proficient in third grade, for example, is 340, in fourth grade, 440, and so forth. This is the index score. That's a formula that the state uses. I'm not exactly, it's a calculus project to figure that out exactly, but that's the index score, which is where all the students in our school, you take the compilation of all their results.
That's what I don't know either.
Oh,
This
comment
one is
about
that scale and what does it mean?
Well, 500, 500 is, means that every student would be proficient.
Right.
The most points a student can get is 500 points. So that's proficient or proficient with
Exceeds.
distinction
Right.
is 500 points. So that's a 3 or a 4. So if a student is a 2, which is nearly proficient, then I think the score there is 275 per student, and then a 1 is considerably lower than that. So this is sort of taking all those scores, okay, compiling them together to get to this number, 465.
Across the different grade levels.
Across all students who took the test, special ed, regular ed, all subgroups, that's the compilation. And in 2014, that's going to jump to 500.
Can you
It says
remember?
all students must be proficient.
It's third, fourth, fifth, and sixth grade, and you have the scores from the seventh grade in there?
Yes, the seventh grade students who take that test here at BAMS, those scores come back to us because they're in seventh grade, but their kneecap is on sixth grade standards,
So we start testing in which grade?
third.
So we're testing second grade.
Well, we're testing third grade students.
At
on
second
the
grade knowledge.
Second grade knowledge,
Right.
yes, well put. So one of the things we want to point out about this slide is that while you can see we've really brought those students who were below proficient up, we've also been successful at moving up our students who were proficient. So all of our students are moving up. Obviously, the kids who were below proficient are moving up at a faster pace, but we've been able to move all of our students up. And that's because the kinds of things we're doing, our good instruction benefits all learners. To illustrate that, this is, I call it the highest lowest, and yes.
So going back to the slide before.
Yeah.
So you have your red line, which is all students. Does
Yeah.
that take out your SES and special ed, or is
No, that's everybody.
so?
Everybody who took kneecap.
Alright, is there any way of looking at just students who, because couldn't you say that gain, the increment gain for the all students was solely driven by the green and the blue lines? Is there any way of telling?
Yes, we can disaggregate the data, so we can look at any group. We can look at just special ed, which is what the bottom line shows us, or just at SES kids, or we can look at just regular ed, non-SES kids, and we can see that growth. I didn't give you all that data today because it's a 20-minute presentation.
It's beyond us. It's beyond us.
And it may be bogging down, but yes, we have that, and we can see nice growth there. And this next graph will kind of indicate that to some degree. So students can get a 1, 2, 3, or 4 on a kneecap. 1 is substantially below proficient. That's the lowest score you can get. A 4 is the highest score you can get, proficient with distinction. So we're really concerned about that. And you can see in 2006, that in reading, about 7% of our students were scoring at the highest level. That's not a lot. Yet, 20% of our students, 13% of our students at the time were substantially below proficient. They were getting the lowest score on NECAP. In 2011, we managed to get 25% of our students at the highest, scoring at the highest level on NECAP. It's 1 in 4 of our students scoring at the highest possible level, and only 3% of our students scoring at the lowest level. There's the highest, there's the lowest. So you can see the blue is the growth of students achieving at the highest level. The red is those at the lowest level. So we want the red to go down, the blue to go up.
Was 2009 a jump year?
2009
Was that when
was a
the
blip
bar
for us.
was raised?
No, it would have been, I think, 10. 2009, we've analyzed that to death. If we sort of took a dip there and had a number of factors that,
We felt like motivation was a big piece of that, and I'll talk about that a little later in the presentation, where we felt like we did that. We went, what the heck happened? We've been doing all this great stuff, and all of a sudden we had that dip. And so we took on a motivation piece.
at the time, it didn't feel good to us, but I can tell you it was a tremendous learning experience for us, and it helped us to really propel us to be a lot better. So we really examined everything that we were doing based on that dip that year, and really took a second look and a hard look at, what we're doing and what.
I'm sure you did this, but there are 2 other groups in there, and even though you may have dropped on proficient with distinction, if you look, I mean, it would be, I know we're not gonna do this today, but, as a principal, you wanna look at, how the kids were nearly proficient, because
Yeah.
you
Yeah,
could have
yeah,
had
we
a
did.
growth in there.
Yeah.
We did, that's a
Yes.
really good point.
Thank
We
you.
had a lot of data meetings looking at that specific thing.
So sometimes we beat ourselves up.
Yeah.
We work hard, and if we don't continue to get the growth, we beat ourselves up, and not necessarily.
So move over to math, in '06, only 9% of our students were proficient with distinction in math, scoring at the highest level. And but 30%, almost 1 in 3, were performing in math at the lowest level. Huge concern. What in the world were we doing wrong in math? So, and in 2011, you can see that 25% of our students this past year reached the highest level in mathematics. And we've gone from 30% at the lowest level to 11%. So again, the blue went way up, highest level from 9 to 25%, and we dramatically decreased the number of students scoring at the lowest level. So Jean will talk to us about how we did it.
So we knew we had to change because obviously we had all these underachieving children. So it was a pretty impressive time to be a part of the staff, to see us go from a school where we were able to look at ourselves that clearly. You can click to 2 through 2. Thanks. The next one. Because we had to make a complete school culture change. We really were excuse-driven. We often blamed things that were out of our control. There was always a reason why a kid was failing. It was kind of a negative place to be, really. We worked in our own classrooms or in really small groups of collaboration. And so to really take a step back and look at yourself is an amazing process, and not always easy. You've got to have the right leadership for that to work. The result is that we're now very result-driven. We look at our data, we look at what our goals are, and we focus on what we can change and what we can control. And we're extremely collaborative. And part of that is because now we have time to meet as teams and we work as a whole staff. We put the children first. We meet the needs of each child, regardless of home and socioeconomic status. And we truly have a no-excuse belief system. And a lot of people are like, what does that mean? Well, what it means is that we believe that all the kids can succeed. We believe that every kid can be proficient. And best, now they believe it.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, and when we say that, what we say is that we just have to find a way. So we see kids that aren't proficient, and they're most often kids who come from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. So how can we make them proficient? What do they need? What do they need to do? They need more. They need extra, and that's the key. Because if they just get what everyone else is doing, they're not going to improve. They need more.
What do you do to help the children believe? How do you recognize the children and build in them?
Well, we're gonna,
We're
if
gonna
we
get
go
to that?
on, yeah, we're gonna get to
All
that,
right.
we'll talk a little bit more about what we do on that. We have a distributive leadership now, and a couple of things that Andy put in place, and the reason why Andy is such a great leader is he knows how to use people, and not use them, but, you know, you know what I mean. He knows how to put people into spots where they're really willing to give our best. So we started a school improvement team, which is a group of teachers that meet every week, and we always have goals and work on our action planning and how can we improve things. We also have 4 teacher leaders in the building, 2 in math and 2 in literacy, that drive our professional development and keep that collaboration piece going. We looked at best practices to get our results, looking at that school culture that we talked about. One of the things that we started with some committees, one was completely on data. How are we going to use data for our decision making? This was a big change in education. For a long time, it was like you do your report cards and you'd be like, yeah, little John, I kind of feel like he's getting better. And now it was, no, let's look at the bottom line. What's the data telling us? So we started looking at some really pretty clear data, and we were sort of ahead of the other elementary schools in doing this. We started doing some Dibble's work and then Ames Webb, and now all of the elementary schools are using that system to help us look at that data. We use formative assessment all the time to inform our instruction, constantly looking at how it's changing and how it's affecting the kids.
What does that mean?
Formative assessment it's a little different than just looking at your kneecap. Your kneecap is summative. At the end, this is how we did. The formative assessment is your day-to-day, what's happening in the classroom. I just taught a math lesson. I need to check on the kids and see how they did on that. It may be a really quick check, like a little journal entry. It may be something where it's answer the question as you go out to lunch for me. Checking in and making sure all the kids are getting that. So it's a constantly changing thing that happens day to day. We also started interventions, which was a pretty exciting part of what Andy was talking about, and that became a during school, after school. We started response to intervention skills groups, where we took the data and broke the kids up into different groups, moved them around, used all the extra staff that we could find to do our art teachers involved, our librarians involved, our enrichment teacher, all of our academic support teachers, title teachers are part of that. After school, we have a very big extended day program where teachers will refer children for tutoring, and we have teachers and staff that work with the children on specific goals for to meet the proficiency. I keep saying your hand. Sure.
And maybe you're getting into it right now because I want to know what you're doing in terms of data-driven decision-making
Yeah.
and how much that interacts with. You see a kid who has some needs and you're going for an intervention. Do you need a lot of data to do that, or do you have something special here that in the data-driven piece that you're going to explain to us?
I'm not sure if we had that. Did we have Ames Web or something? Just
We'll mention names up in
Yeah,
a
yeah.
slide coming up.
Okay, I'm going to let Andy talk to you more about data. If we don't get specific enough, then you can check with us again and we'll get more specific.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand how you're doing that and how you're using that. And
It's not like it's not a one-shot deal. We have something where we check the fluency for the children through like Ames Web, how they're doing with their reading, and then we have classroom assessments that we use as well. We use running records for reasoning. We use some math skill-driven assessments that are really quick, but then we can check the numbers.
Here's that slide on assessments,
I'll let
Gene. So there's a few formative assessments on top, and the best thing, the most important part of the formative assessment is that it gives the teacher information about the learner, so she can now change her instruction to where the learner's at. So teachers do a lot of that every day, because you can teach a lesson and think kids all got it, but often they don't. So this goes from thinking they got it to knowing who got it and who didn't, and saying, okay, what do these kids need now? Because I know they didn't get it, so how do I get them there?
Right, and it becomes a real differentiation. I think that's what's really important is where you would have been before said, okay, well, let's see, 70% of my class got this. Great, move on to the next thing. Now we're saying, whoa, 30 didn't. What am I going to do for those 30 so that they do get it? So that becomes a big change in the culture.
Otherwise, those kids get left behind. You keep moving on, making assumptions, and then 3 weeks, 4 weeks on the road, you realize, wow, they're way behind. Now it's much more difficult to catch them up, and they begin to feel lost in class and frustrated. And when they're frustrated, they'll act out.
So meanwhile, what do you do with that 70% that are ready to move on?
Well, that's
Do they wait for the 30?
No, that's the beauty of differentiation in using the formative assessments and the skills block that we mentioned, or that response to intervention. That group of children, we look at them and say, okay, here's a group that we can really take further, enrichment. And so we will put them during that skills block time where we're going to work with that 30% or whatever percent of kids that need the extra work. They're going to have some enrichment. They're going to go with the enrichment teacher. Or here's a group of kids that we have that are really on grade level, but they could really use a little more practice with some of these skills. So another teacher's going to take that group. And then we have this group that needs it intensive. So we're going to put those in small groups and maybe put those with 3 or 4 teachers. So we're really hitting the skills specific to each of the children.
And that's all in the classroom. And then part of it has to be, how do those kids get more? Because you're right, that's very difficult to do. It's, we're describing it like it's real easy, but it's not. So how do we keep that group that's got it moving forward, and pull the other group along? And the answer has to be more. They need more time. They need something additional. So how do you find the additional? Well, we do before school, we do after school, we extend it, we call it extended day. We extend the day. 6.5 hours isn't enough time for every kid. We do summers, summer program for those kids. And then Jean's talked about a skills block where we found time in our day where every student in every grade goes to either an intervention or an enrichment class for 30 to 40 minutes. We do that 4 times a week. So another opportunity to get those kids who are struggling and get them where they need to be, and to take the kids who are doing well, take them further.
Just an aside, that it requires a certain intensity of staffing patterns that a lot of people aren't willing to understand or accept, I would think.
Yeah, and it's that culture thing that we talked about.
Yeah, that's the culture.
That buying in of the teachers and the commitment. And that's from great leadership.
Andy, at some point you might talk about that as a leader, how you change that and cultivate that.
Okay. Well, you definitely need the right people, and they have to, the buzzword is buy-in, but I always say people who work at McDonald's, they buy in. We want people to embrace. Buy-in's not good enough. We need them to embrace it. They got to believe it, and they got to love it. And the way you do that is you see the results. And I remember a few years ago we tried to start an after-school tutorial program, and couldn't get teachers to buy in or embrace it. We couldn't get staff to tutor. And I remember pleading with a couple of primary teachers to work with their students, 1 or 2 students after school, and let's do some pre and post testing. And Jean was one of those teachers, and she did it very reluctantly, but she did it. And after 3 weeks, she was at a staff meeting, and she stood up without being asked to. She just stood up and said, "Oh my God, what an amazing difference I've seen in 3 weeks with the 2 students that I'm tutoring." And that was end of issue, because the results proved that it worked. And then, so a few other people did it, and so on and so forth. And we went from about 2 kids to servicing a lot of kids now after school. We have so many kids, we have to run a bus after school to get them home. So the biggest thing, I think, is that you have to prove it. Because teachers come to work to make a difference, because they come to work because they love kids, they want to, they want to educate kids, they want to make a difference. So if you can prove that this will do it, they'll do it.
Just go ahead to the,
Why we click? Are you there?
that's you.
So you're done.
I'm done.
Okay.
For now.
Okay, so we talked a lot about data, so I'll go through this quickly. Obviously, data informs instruction. That's so important. In almost anything we do nowadays, you bring your car because it's not running properly, the mechanic collects some data to inform instruction, how's he going to repair it. That's so important for the teachers to make adjustments based on the data to reach their learners. It enables the immediate intervention. What we found is that if you wait to do an intervention, if you wait 3 weeks before you correct it, it's often too late. Interventions, the response has to be immediate. It's got to be quick. You got to catch the kids right away before they get frustrated, and get them to a point where they understand what's going on. Dramatically, not only improves student achievement, but dramatically cuts down on number of kids being sent out of class for referrals, because most of the time kids are sent out of class or they're kicked out of class because they're acting up because they're frustrated. They're not getting their needs met, meet their needs, and they're not going to act up. We also use data for our school improvement plan. We're constantly annually assessing our plan, revising our plan, creating a new plan, and we're using data. We look at our school climate surveys to see how students respond to what we're doing, kneecap data, summative data, formative assessment, and so forth. So data's become a way of life for our staff.
You already talked about that slide.
We talked about this, the difference between formative and summative assessments. And now we have all the data. How do we make use of it? How do we take this data to improve student learning and improve a school? So we formed grade level data teams. Those teams meet every month, and we look at the data. So the team consists of the administration, special education teacher, academic support, formerly called Title I teacher, and our English language learner teacher. So Jean's on second grade teacher, so the second grade team meets with us and the other folks, and we look at the data for that month. So we'll soon be looking at.
What data are you looking at on a monthly basis?
Well, it depends what we're talking about at the time. It might be some literacy data that we're looking at or some math. We always talk about literacy and math, but for the most part, we'll look at some of our quick screeners that we have. That's the Ames web and that type of thing. Oftentimes, the second grade team will have given a common assessment for math, and we might look at that assessment.
So we use that data then, and we go through and look at classroom, look at the whole grade, and individuals. And students who are not at benchmark, then we say, okay, they need more. So we then progress monitor them. But all students will get assessed on Ames web assessment that we use frequently, 3 times a year. And we say with students who need to be progress monitored, students who aren't doing well, we're going to progress monitor them. We're going to assess them every 2 weeks. We're going to try some interventions. We're going to try a new intervention strategy. We're going to give them more, but we want to know how that's working. So every 2 weeks, we're going to reassess them to see how they're responding to our intervention. If they're not responding well, then we know we've got to change something. What is it that they need? So it's diagnosis and prescription. Yes.
How do you also ensure that, in addition to reading and math, that students, have the skills, the basic needs for sciences and social studies in additional?
Well, right now we're going through a big change because of Common Core that is coming. It's just nationally driven. But we're not quite there yet with the Common Core. So we're still using our Vermont standards, and we're looking at those as well and saying, okay, these are the standards for second grade that I need to meet for science, and then matching that with some data as well. Are we as strong as we are in our math and literacy? No, but that's partly because we don't have the screeners for that we do have for math and literacy. But remember, your science and your literacy are going to clunk like this. Science, social studies have to happen with literacy. That's part of the Common Core drive.
It seems like a curse and a blessing, but to make this thing work, it sounds like you have to have a pretty set piece curriculum of these people are going to be looking at this point in time in the 3rd grade and so forth.
That was one of the
That
big
would give you
changes
the clarity of what you're talking about, but would also lockstep you into a uniform curriculum for everybody. So how do you make the balance?
Well, that's been really tricky for me, especially because it's really hard to always be using a curriculum and have everything in a box, what it feels like when you're teaching. But it's part of that professional development piece. We've looked at our professional development much deeper than just the curriculum. The curriculum, anyone can do a curriculum. You could walk in and you could read my recommendations book and teach that class. Are you going to teach it well? Are you going to have your goals? Are you going to have your learning objectives in the forefront? No. And so our professional development comes from around that, digging in really deep, doing a training like something that's called a letters training, which is a linguistic program, really looking at the language and what language means. Doing a staff-wide professional development with math as a second language, which is looking at everything about math and the meaning of math and really hard math problems for adults to do so that we'll have better understanding. So do you see what we're doing? So our professional development is making us better experts at what we do so we can use the curriculum more effectively. The curriculum helps us stay on the same page, helps us have a common language, helps us so that the kids don't go from second grade, 3 different second grades to a new third grade class where the language is all different and they're going, what? We never learned this, because it was taught 3 different ways.
So it's a combination of simultaneously being tight and loose. And you have to identify what we have to be tight about. There's certain things that Tina's talking about have to be tight. Every kid in 3rd grade, or every kid in 2nd grade, has to get this. They need this. Okay? But there's some things that we can be loose about, and it's figuring that out and understanding that we can be loose, we can be tight. There's certain things like in the foundations which, to implement correctly, every teacher must follow and implement this program, 30 minutes a day, exactly how it's to be, without being loose. This is the tight section part. But then there's other things in literacy, for example, that the teachers have more freedom. They can be loose about. They can match it to the interests of the students, and so forth.
Don?
I'm going to lose my question here in a minute, but we talk a lot about leadership at the state board level. How many years have you been principal here?
Well, I was at BAMS for 13 years, and I've been at Academy School, which BAMS is the middle school here, that Ingrid Crisco is now principal of. And I've been at Academy, this is my 7th year.
Okay. So you've had nearly 20 years in the district then?
Yes.
Okay. Right. Number 2, who determines which students are assigned to which classroom teacher? Because this has always been a process that I personally have been interested in, because I think it makes a difference. So how do you decide that certain kids are going to go to her versus some other 2nd grade teacher?
Well, that's a lengthy process at our school. It takes,
Good, it should be.
weeks. And the sending teachers, so the 2nd grade teachers will have first blush at it, and it'll give significant input into where the child goes in 3rd grade. We also look at special ed teachers give support, because we have to, sometimes you have to put special ed students together, because if they're receiving the same service, we can't staff it if they're in 3 different classrooms, for example. So we'll put them in one classroom so one teacher can service them at the same time. So there's a lot of factors that go in. We also give parents an opportunity to give us input about their learner. And we give parents a lot of opportunity to do that, in fact. So it's
Can I just add something about that too?
Sure.
For me, that's become so much less of an issue. And being a parent and having kids that have grown up and always wanted to pick my own teacher. Okay, I want this teacher specifically. It's very different now, because I think with our collaboration, and we're doing, like, we do observations of each other, and what we have going on right now at Academy School is pretty amazing, because if I'm really good at something, the other 2nd grade teachers tap into that and say, oh, how can we do that? That's working for you. That data is showing. So what can we do? So it's much less of an issue now of you have to have that teacher, because you're going to get this team of teachers that are working with the kids. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense, because I've always believed that if the teachers who receive them and the parents who send them feel that's the best placement, then you're already ahead of the game. So.
And what we say is that all teachers need to be able to work with all of our students. That's our goal. Not allow one teacher just to work with the ELL kids in that grade, or special ed students. That we have to, everyone has to work with all of our kids.
So it's trust and collaboration, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So additional interventions, we talked about the extended day tutorial program. 6.5 hours is not enough time for all of our students, so we need to find additional time before and after school, summer school, anytime we can.
Before you leave that point, this whole initiative, and I congratulate you on it, it seems to demand a lot of flexibility that I don't think traditionally has been in the school system, and I may be wrong about that, but it seems to me that.
You're right.
Now I know I'm onto a good point when Bill agrees with me.
Points in the back.
You know, as you've explained this, that, you know, it seems to me that the teachers certainly need to be flexible, willing to stay after school, or maybe even come in early, which would require some flexibility from parents and the students and the administration. I mean, how do you achieve that? I don't think that culture is always there.
Well, you're right, that's part of the culture, and I think when we're focused on the student and what do we need to do, people rise up. Now, we have some people who, for example, a few years ago, when we started doing before school, we had some people who said, I can't stay after and do tutorials because I've got young kids, or I'm in a graduate program. But early in the morning works for me. So if I can get kids to come in early, could I do that? And yeah, of course you can. So we flexed their day. They started earlier, ended a little earlier, or vice versa. So you're right, you have to be flexible, not look at, well, everyone's got to start at 8 o'clock and everyone's got to be here till 3:30 till that bell rings. And say, the heck with that. Let's focus on meeting the needs of our kids, matching that with the needs of our teachers to get our best result.
And we do get paid. It's not like we're just, we're saints, we're gonna put in the extra hour. It's not the greatest money that we get, but it is, there's a money for the teachers too, and,
For coming in
staff.
early or staying late.
Yes, yeah, you get, for whatever that tutoring time there is, a certain
And what
stipend.
about the parental issues of, you're asking a student to come in early and the bus route doesn't come? I mean, is that?
Free
That's-
daycare,
again,
that's not usually a problem.
Yeah, that may not work for all families, but we just try to offer as many different approaches as we can, so that may not work. The after-school may not work for some families, before school does. Before school may not work for everybody, because we can't bus them, but we don't have a problem getting most kids to school early, just with parents being so busy, and so on and so forth, that parents are always happy to get their kids to school earlier in the morning.
Is
And
it
the
a
bus is big
stipend
thing. There
or?
would be kids that would not be able to do the after-school program without a bus. That became something we figured out pretty quickly. These were gonna be the families that maybe don't have a car and can't come to pick up the children. So we knew that one of the things we had to include when we were setting up this program and financing it was a bus to be able to bring the kids home after the.
For both of your points up there, is it a stipend or a negotiated part of your master agreement, a little bit of both?
It's a stipend, and we first started the extended day program through the school improvement grant the state was offering to schools.
Strictly as a stipend.
And so we have a stipend for teachers on an hourly basis for them.
And we've developed that universally for our supervisory union at a certain rate, so we work with the association on that.
Okay.
We started district data coach, literacy, and in our school now we have literacy and math coaches who, they're really important. We have literacy and 2 math coaches, they're full-time teachers, they get paid a stipend to work, do work after the school day is over, and they're responsible for most of our professional development. After school, we have weekly meetings, but they're no longer staff meetings where I would stand up and talk to teachers and waste their time. We now do math PD and literacy PD, led by our coaches. So that's worked out really great. That's part of the whole professional development piece. Also, we changed our model for professional development by, in the past, there'd be a great workshop somewhere and 6 teachers would go off and do it. get that workshop, or we'd have another group go off somewhere else and do another workshop and so on and so forth, and it doesn't make any sense doing it that way. Because those initiatives don't work unless they're school-wide. So what we try to say is that if this is something that is going to benefit students, then we all have to do it, and we do it together. So we structure the PD so that we're all doing it, so we all get the same training, so we can have full implementation of it school-wide. And that's a much more effective way to do it.
Question for, I guess, the superintendent. So we're hearing about this school, but I know you have 2 other elementary schools. Their professional development plans
Yep.
set up the same way, Ron?
We have 10 schools, and this
Yeah,
year in particular,
yeah.
we've, for the elementary schools, have developed professional development in math, literacy, social justice, technology, certain strands that all teachers will participate in. So it's trying to be more consistent with the work that we're doing.
Supervisory union-wide, is that what you
Yes,
said?
yes.
We did form a best practices committee, and if there's a best practice out there, we want to know about it, and we'll look at it, want to get the evidence, and if it can make us better, we'll implement. Which means we may be looking at other schools. We focus a lot on, if there are schools that are working with a population like ours, and they're doing something really great, they're getting great results, or their kids are doing better, we want to find out what they're doing, and we want it.
And research-based is another one of our things that it's got to be research-based.
Teacher leaders already mentioned. We mentioned our RTI model, which is our skills block. And student motivation.
Yeah. I'll go quickly through this because that was that bleep year we had in 2009, that we started a motivation committee as part of the best practices sort of a subcommittee, because we were like, okay, we got all this stuff going, now we got to get the kids to believe too. We really need to show them, and somebody asked this question before, some of the things that we did. You know, when you look at the kneecap and motivating for a big test, it's different than how we motivate in the class. In the classrooms, we can tell them all the time, you know, you're doing a great job, you're getting that formative assessment, they're getting that feedback, we're telling them you did a great job, we might be giving them some type of reward or something because it's in the class. But then we wanted to take it like school-wide. How can we make this bigger? How can we let them know that the kneecap and other assessments that we do are important? So we went school-wide. We started with our cheerleaders. So these are 5 classroom teachers, and it started out as kneecap teachers. Now they're the star teachers because we've taken it away just from the kneecap. But they will motivate. I'm not even kidding you that the second teacher in with the E on her, she does backflips. The kids go wild. They come in, they cheer, they say things to the kids. Who's an Academy star? That means something school-wide. We have a whole program around the acronym of STAR, of how their behavior should be. They love it. They eat it up. They can't wait for our cheerleaders. So that was one big
It's
motivation.
noticeable that this is not a full team effort. Neither the principal or the superintendent are dressed.
No,
I've
but
got pictures of Andy.
to be fair, Andy, one of the big motivation things was that first year where we said we really need to move our scores. Andy said if we can move our scores up on the kneecap, that I will kiss a cow. And you know, that's big in Vermont. The kids went crazy over it. He did kiss a cow. That was fantastic. The next year he had to go up. So last year he actually did an acrobatic high, what do they call
Trapeze.
that? Trapeze thing for us because he's kind of afraid of heights. It was so inspiring. I'm not even kidding you. You looked around and the children were like, and then you looked at the adults in tears because it was so inspiring for him to take fear and say, look, I'm going to persevere and do this. So I don't know what he's doing this year. I think he's going to have to skydive in or something. But yeah, there's that piece as
So
well.
this has a lot to do with the joy factor. You know, that you have people working hard, they have to have fun. School has to be fun for students. So we really worked on the joy factor. But one of the things that led us to this was a few years ago, several years ago now, third graders were the first class to take kneecaps. Their first time through, we had third graders. The kids were getting so stressed out about taking kneecaps. They were actually showing physical signs of stress. We had third graders take a kneecap who are crying, okay? And we said something's wrong. Either we got to stop doing kneecap, and I'll get fired, or we've got to find a way to de-stress this. we've got to change this because the kids, it's unhealthy. So we created the joy factor for them, and this whole motivation thing, making it fun, de-stressing it, has been amazing. And we have kids who will come up to me after a kneecap session and say, I answered every question. I went back, I checked my work. And that's amazing. And we don't want to just teach skills to kids that'll be successful on kneecap. We want to teach them skills to be successful their whole life.
Well, we have a pep rally before the kneecaps. These are the younger students make signs and cheer on the older students so they feel involved as well. Very cute. They get all excited for it.
But we stole this from high schools, high school pep rally, big football game or big event, and how it builds school spirit and so forth, and team spirit. So we stole this, and we make our students who are taking kneecap, we make them the stars on this day. And it's amazing how much now kids look forward to this pep rally and coming into the gym and feeling good about kneecaps. We have second graders who say, oh, I can't wait to take kneecap next year. It's amazing.
They do. They're so excited.
That's sick.
So, one of the biggest questions that we get is why does it work for Academy School? I run with a friend of mine who works in a couple of the other schools, and she's always like, but we have that curriculum, but we're doing that professional development. I don't get it. Why is it so much better at Academy School? And I think, it's really that culture that has done it. We listen to our kids, first of all. When we started doing that motivation piece, we said to the kids, well, what do you think? How do you feel about it? And they were like, yay, we're being listened to, okay. And our teachers really are invested. And as Andy said, it's that proof. He shows us if we do this, this is what's going to happen. It feels really good to be successful. It was awful in 2006 when we were the lowest and everything. Our teachers are invested. We really changed our culture. And most importantly, I think the biggest for me, I don't have research, but it's belief. We believe it, and most importantly, the kids believe it. They believe in themselves at Academy School. If you ever have the opportunity to be in that building, it is a thrilling place to go every day because these children honestly and completely believe that they can do anything.
So just a quick summary, no excuses, and that means giving kids more. Distributive leadership, teachers having ownership of the whole school, improving Tier 1 instruction, which is classroom instruction, form of assessments, the interventions, motivation, and of course, get results. So that's our story. Thank you.
Sorry, it was so long.
Thank you very much.
Stephen, could I just
Sure.
make a few comments? I'd like to acknowledge Andy's leadership. Obviously, you can see that from the presentation, but we were very fortunate to, when he left from the middle school, he went down to Massachusetts, and we convinced him to come back. And it was interesting, the middle school principal coming back to an elementary school, and I remember the first months in Academy School, he loved visiting kindergarten classes and reading to kindergartners, and it was a really nice transformation. But, his leadership, along with seeing the school improvement team, people like Jean, just school-wide investment. One of the things that I think about the staffing, that it takes resources. Now, Dawn, you asked earlier, I think, did we increase staff? We didn't increase staff, but we changed the nature of the staff. So the teacher leaders that Andy talked about, I think we're blessed to have a very strong central office curriculum and assessment team. And through the ARA funding that all districts received, we were able to use that for literacy, math, and data coaches. And because they've been so helpful, we've decided as an SU, as a district, to keep that funding through Title I funding, and we have to supplement it through local funds. And that's an important thing for us, to get the consistency in the other schools as well. Bill, your question about some of the buy-in or some of the engagement with teachers, we use a system SU-wide where we have grade level teacher meetings twice a year. And a few years back, we started to talk about the Ames Web progress monitoring approach. There had been a lot of work done on literacy, and I'll never forget one of the grade level meetings where we were making a decision about whether we should do this in math. And teachers from the grade levels were saying, well, we're doing it in literacy, it makes a lot of sense. Why would we wait another year to do it in math? Let's get on with it and do it. So that was very helpful in terms of kind of a collaborative leadership approach that got those teachers invested in that process. And then I think what Armando said earlier about and John, about the summer programming and the after-school programming. We've had 4 weeks of summer programming. We're going to have to cut it back to 3 because of the lack of Title I funding, but we're committed to make that up through local funds. So it's going to cost some money, but we've seen the results. We track this data. We've seen kind of the summer lull in terms of the learning. We've seen what 4 weeks can do for these students, and we feel like we're committed to maintaining that. So any funding that we can receive from the state as part of these grants is very helpful. So, thank you.
Ron, do you see, obviously, congratulations in what you've done in 4 or 5 years at Academy School. Do you see that transferred to when the kids move to middle school and on to high school?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think we're, again, blessed to have Ingrid Crisco at the middle school. We have outlying principals, K-8 buildings that certainly understand all of the implications that we've talked about. Steve Perrin, our high school principal. It's really nice to see the transitions. So, yeah, I think we're very fortunate.
Don?
And you're not here to listen to us, we're here to listen to you, but if, in the discussions that we've had recently with other people, if you have to reduce the number of summer school days, then what people have found is most effective in that option, it may not be the best option, is to run it equal number of weeks, but fewer days.
Yeah.
So that you run a 3-day and
Right.
get to the same place as a 5-day.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you're on top of that, but when I first heard it, I kind of went, well, they're cutting, they're really cutting, and they are. But it does seem that some of the data that I've seen says that if you have a 4-day week or sometimes a 3-day week, you can still make good progress because the students are engaged
Right.
and there are things they can
Extending
do. in
that time
between.
over
So
time.
it's better than, thank you.
Sean Marie?
So here's the age-old question, where your school is in its 4th year of corrective action, and yet
Yeah.
you see the arrow going up, 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 and the space between your free and reduced lunch and your special ed narrowing. So does your local media and your press identify you as failing schools or schools improving? I mean, this I think is one of the problems we have in Vermont is, while this is an outstanding, I mean, there are many schools that make the shift that you're making, and yet we got a packet today with, every school over maybe 150 students is identified on here. And
73% in Vermont.
It's not failing, though. It's not failing.
well, but I'm talking about the media perceiving it as that.
So I'll start, and then Andy can get into more specifics, because I know he had a kind of a bad incident recently. But we work pretty closely with the local media. Irregardless, the first headline is so many failing schools. We can't get their editorial staff to remove that sort of thing. But we work really hard. We bring them in ahead of time. We show them the data. We show them the gains. And the articles are generally pretty favorable. But it is a morale killer. And
It is.
there's no way around that. The other thing we try to do is show how Vermont students do on the National Assessment of Educational Progress, the NAEP test. And we're always in the top tier nationally in terms of English and literacy and math skills. And so any people that I speak with in terms of the media, school board members, the community, I always tie that in. Vermont has set high standards. I think the Common Core will help because it's more of a consistent assessment. But there is that negative piece to ranking and rating and that whole AYP failure stuff. It's hard.
I mean, I'm just acknowledging it. It is
Yep.
difficult around the state to get to that, but I
Yep.
see you individually get to your newspapers and media.
Yeah. Sometimes they buy it, sometimes they don't.
Don?
Maybe the good news is that if you read the data, newspapers are selling fewer copies than they used to, okay? But the other thing is, and I think this goes back over 30 years ago, but I'm sure you probably do it, but a newsletter that is mailed in some format to every home or delivered to every home that gets the jump on the media, because honestly, I find in our area that fewer people are buying newspapers. Some are on the internet, but it's a discretionary expense, and most people are saying, or many people, the Burlington Free Press had just changed their format. I mean, they were in trouble with the subscription. So there is hope that maybe we'll get rid of the newspapers, but I think that what you need to do, and you're doing it.
There's a culture change that needs to happen, that bad news is the only good news.
Yeah, that is really it. And school districts aren't noted for being proactive on getting the good news out. I'm sure you're better than most, but most school districts are.
We, I think our parents are pretty aware of our success. We try to get that out to them on our webpage and newsletters and things we send home. So, in fact, this year, we have 8 students that have joined us who were previously going to school at a private school. So parents made the decision to remove their child from a private school to begin with us. So we're really proud of that. So we feel like the message of success is getting out.
Good.
Thank you very much for
you.
excellent presentation. Kathy?
Just one last comment. I just wanted to say, we, as a state board, as you've been hearing about our priorities, like addressing the achievement gap, one of the things we want to do is affirm the importance of strong school leadership, and this is a great example. So you've helped us work on that priority too, so thank you.
And along those lines, one of our other priorities is make sure we brag a bit about our achievements in education. So we have certainly seen that this morning, and thank you.
So we'll see a news release come out saying State Board views outstanding presentation, and the department will get that out for us.
Well, one of the, Andy sent me an email about several weeks ago. I'm coming down next Thursday, I believe it is, or next Tuesday. Wednesday, thank you. To visit, because the results that he shared with all of you and hopefully the community were so impressive that I said, I have to get down here and see what's happening, because what's happening here, and it's not superhuman. It's people doing hard work, staying consistent, following through. And I also, in my press release around the science results, used Academy School as one of the examples of the work that's being done here. With a fairly diverse population, with all the issues that all schools have. So I think that you just saw here what we would like to emulate around the state is this type of dedication work, fun, and ultimately doing what's in the best interest of kids. So I can't wait to come down next Wednesday. Thank you.
Comment or question, if I could.
Go ahead, Phil.
Thank you.
Wonderful segue, Ron, in terms of the media attention and the negativity that they put out there, and then we get the Title I technical assistance alert, which the feds are imposing upon us, that basically says here you have to report to the public a whole bunch of negative things in terms of comparisons and things of that sort. And here we're into a real conundrum of sending very mixed signals. And how can we reconcile this?
Talking to me? I think that we have to be able to acknowledge and celebrate success. At the same time, when we have some of the challenges that we have, we're facing, I think that we have to also be honest. One of the challenges in Vermont that I faced ever since I started teaching here is that we somehow feel that we're very special compared to the rest of the country. And we are. But at the same time, just because you're special doesn't mean that there are not areas that we need to improve on. The question is finding that balance and making sure that the media, as Andy said, the articles quite often are decent. It's the headlines that are written by somebody else that I think we have to make sure that those are accurate. One of the things, and I learned this years ago from one of my superintendents, was that in Vermont, many of in the news media are trying to cut their teeth so they can move on to the next larger news media of some way. You do that by bringing negative attention to things that maybe aren't there. One of the things I always talk to them about is that you have a social responsibility for the state to report things accurately, both the good as well as the things we need support in, or we need to improve. But that doesn't always get picked up. And I think the relationship that Ron and the school district probably has with the Brattleboro Reformer, The relationship that I had when I was a superintendent and principal with the local media, both the Franklin County, the Messenger, and the Free Press, were very beneficial, because these guys, when they meet with them, they're not just giving them one side of the story. They're being honest with them about the good and the challenges. And I think that credibility that comes is huge in getting the media, and particularly the editors, to report both sides of the story, not just the headlines.
You know, another thing that I find is very helpful, and I don't know if you're still doing them, but your op-eds were always very helpful.
God, don't encourage them.
Well, I'll tell you, you know, it's material that I would always use to say, look, there's another side to this, and it was really helpful, so I would encourage you to keep doing it. Sorry, Steve.
It's all right.
Slick answer, I have to say.
Mr. Chairman, before we leave this topic, I know we've kind of talked around the periphery of this at various meetings, but I really think that shortly after each state board meeting, there should be a news release about our meeting and some of the things that are happening. Because I still get asked, people know I'm on state board, what does a state board do? And then, of course, some people
I
do.
think there is a news release usually, assuming we do something, I think.
Yeah. I still go back to the wonderful presentation we had a few months ago, and I know Jeff Francis said, and maybe it came out while I was gone, but, the people, Martha Tuck and the people that presented and how enthusiastic we were. And that was a great opportunity within a few days to get something out to the media, whether it's under the name of the chair or the state board. I don't think much has happened with that. And today, this would be a great thing to take in some way, somebody put together. I don't know if it's Brian, I don't know if it's a department, but, here we are in Brattleboro. And where I live, most people don't know or care where Brattleboro is, but at the same time, I think they do care about the state board. So I don't know how we do it.
Well, I'll work, at least for the next few months, work with the department and see if we can engineer that. That, obviously, after January 1st, will have to be something we do ourselves.
Maybe we can put a little stipend in our budget and hire Brian to do it for us.
Before we leave this, I want to ask the commissioner and probably John, we hear these wonderful stories occasionally of where there's great improvement, there's some new techniques, but we also hear all the negative news that has been referenced earlier. And as you know, this is a number one priority of the State Board of Education. Is there anything in current law or state rules that need to allow more opportunity for improvement?
I want to go back to something that, along those same lines, the issue about flexibility that somebody brought up before. Yes, the school's has to be flexible to be able to meet the needs of kids sometimes early in the morning, after school. What I also heard Andy and others say is there's some places there is no flexibility. This is not higher ed. We don't have academic freedom. We have standards and we have particular things that we have to accomplish. And what Andy has shown, and probably others in the SU and others around the state, is that there are certain things that we all must do in order to achieve certain levels of students meeting standards. While at the same time, teachers, the school, parents, others have to be flexible around the structure of the school, I think, which is where I think I misunderstood when somebody said flexibility. There has to be flexibility in the structure. But I think around best practices, as Jeannie mentioned, and others, there has to be a very tight system, again, which is what Andy was talking about. I am often concerned when I hear folks, and you all received an email from Ken Page, I think a day or two ago, that I did not receive, which I found interesting, that somebody will go to the state board. I saw it, and I responded to him. That you all received, and dozens of principals received, but I, as the Commissioner of Education, didn't. Which concerns me around this whole process right now is, am I so lame duck, or am I so lame a duck, that I am now being bypassed by folks and going directly to the board? So I think that concept that is being discussed, and I'm also, again, my point is, I'm not quite sure when I hear folks, Dr. Mathis, others say that our system isn't working, and that I'm not quite sure what it is that folks want to happen, but requiring schools to do certain things, which is, number one, federal law as well as state law, to do certain things, is where there should be less flexibility. How it's accomplished, after school, summer, different teaming, those type of things is where the flexibility occurs. So I think that's a balance, and what Andy and with the leadership of Ron and others and with teachers like Jeannie, they've come to a conclusion that these are the things that work in our school. There is no flexibility around some of these areas. The flexibility occurs in other areas. And I think that's quite often my challenge, and it's not just me, it's anybody who's sat in this position who has to follow certain requirements by law, and I have to follow them, with finding that right balance of that flexibility. You're gonna be seeing those 72% of the schools. You don't have the authority to determine what improvement area is required. That's not your job, that's our job. And the law very specifically gives us that, it gives us 4 areas. And we continue to choose the least intrusive of those 4 areas, because we can go all the way to closing schools. We obviously choose not to do that. Taking over administrative control, we choose not to do that. We choose to work with the experts in the field, the people who are in the schools. That's the experts. We're not the important people here. The important people are folks like Ron and the teachers and Andy. What we can do to support them, but also hold some pressure on them to make sure that when they are getting pushback from folks, whether it be other teachers, parents, community members, that there is that little support coming from us. We watch their back and also help them move forward. I think that's the real balance. You know, the number of schools that you see, I hate when people use the word failure. Not you personally, I know you're just quoting the media, I know that. How do we get the media to look at what we're doing today in education is by far better than we did 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40, 50, 60 years ago, when everybody talks about the good old days. If you believe that the good old days mean that half the kids aren't graduating from high school, if you believe that that the good old days is that the separation, I think those are the things that the media has to move forward. And as Jeannie said, you know, sometimes bad headlines, bad news sells. But the fact that we're working with schools hand in hand, have reorganized the department to really support schools, I think is the direction to go. Why am I coming down here next week? Why have I used Academy School amongst other schools as examples around the state? Because they are doing some strong things. They are doing some good things. It will eventually work its way through the system, so when they get to high school, they will have students who are better prepared, but more motivated, and ultimately do a better job as future Vermonters. So I think that's the piece that is, as you can probably tell, pretty frustrating for me, when no matter what we do, there's always some, and that's okay. It's a free country. People can criticize what they want. But it doesn't mean that we are not going to have the resolve to move forward on what the law requires. And again, if you're not familiar with, read Title 16 and the 4 options that we have as a state. And we continue to choose the least intrusive one, because we understand that it's a collaboration between everyone, not just, I don't know any more than Andy does. I know probably less than Ron and others about what's happening in schools right now. So what would give me the right to think that I can go into a place and tell them what to do? It's a collaborative effort, and I think that's the challenge. Collaboration takes time. It took Andy several years to get this going. We need time to allow things to be implemented, to be nurtured, and to then show the results without us becoming so anxious to have results that we jump from one idea to another.
Well, I'm just in closing this out, I bring this up because obviously it is our number one priority. This board is going to be moving into strictly a policy-making authority, and if the department sees some areas where, you know, we ought to be more proactive to allow educational growth, please tell us. That's the reason I bring it up.
Good, thank you.
We're going to take another media break. We're going to take a 5-minute break while we get set up for the next presentation.